Sophie noticed him on the first day of the school year. Tall, with an easy smile, he stood among a group of 11th graders who seemed to own the school hallways. Maxim Shevchenko, star of the school basketball team, excellent student, and undisputed teacher's favorite. After 2 years at her new school, Sophie had grown accustomed to watching him from afar, never getting close to his orbit. He belonged to a different world, a world where a shy, quiet girl with a book in her hands was practically invisible. "Sophie, finish your breakfast or you'll be late." Her mother's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She looked down at the toast she hadn't even touched and forced herself to take a bite. She hadn't had an appetite for a week, not since Maxim had asked Elisa to the senior prom. The event was just 3 weeks away, and Sophie still couldn't reconcile with the fact that she had never found the courage to speak to the boy who hadn't noticed her existence for 2 years. "You've been looking pale lately." Her father lowered his newspaper and studied his daughter. "Is everything all right at school?" "Yes, just tired from exam preparations," Sophie lied, avoiding his gaze. How could she explain to her parents that her heart was breaking over a boy who didn't even know her name? They wouldn't understand. Her mother, a successful attorney, always spoke about the importance of self-sufficiency. "Girls your age don't need boyfriends. They need goals and ambitions," she would say whenever a romantic movie scene appeared on TV. Her father, though kinder in his approach, seemed equally uncomfortable with discussions about teenage emotions. So Sophie kept her pain to herself, scribbling her feelings in a journal she hid beneath her mattress and crying silently into her pillow at night. The week before prom, Sophie sat alone in the school library, hiding behind a stack of chemistry textbooks. From her secluded corner, she had a perfect view of Maxim and his friends at a nearby table. They were planning their prom night. Dinner reservations, after parties, photographs. Elisa sat beside Maxim, her hand casually resting on his arm, her perfect smile flashing every time he spoke. "You're staring again," a voice whispered, making Sophie jump. Nadia, her only real friend at school, slid into the chair across from her. Her knowing eyes were filled with concern. "I wasn't," Sophie mumbled, quickly looking down at her untouched chemistry notes. "This has to stop, Sophie." "He's not worth it." Nadia pushed the textbook aside to see her friend better. "You haven't been eating, you barely sleep. I can see the dark circles under your eyes even with your makeup." "I'm fine." "No, you're not. And what scares me is that your parents haven't noticed." Sophie shrugged. "They're busy. Dad's company is expanding, and Mom has that big case. Besides, it's just a stupid crush." But they both knew it was more than that. Sophie had spent 2 years building an elaborate fantasy around a boy who had never given her a second glance. Every detail she learned about him, his favorite basketball team, the music he liked, the charity work he did at the local animal shelter, became another brick in the elaborate castle of her imagination, where someday he would finally see her. "You need to talk to someone," Nadia insisted. "If not your parents, then maybe the school counselor." "And say what?" "That I'm pathetically in love with someone who doesn't know I exist? No thanks." The bell rang, signaling the end of their free period. Sophie gathered her books, careful to keep her head down as Maxim and his friends passed by her table. She didn't notice when he accidentally bumped her shoulder or the brief, apologetic glance he gave her before continuing down the hallway. At home that evening, Sophie picked at her dinner, moving food around her plate while her parents discussed their workday. 17 years of living with them had taught her that they expected her to be as rational and level-headed as they were. Displays of emotion were met with awkward silence or practical solutions that missed the point entirely. "Sophie, you've lost weight," her mother suddenly noticed, interrupting her story about a difficult client. "Are you dieting? Because at your age, that's unnecessary and potentially harmful." "I'm not dieting," Sophie replied. "Just not very hungry lately." "Are you sleeping enough? Your exams are important, but not worth sacrificing your health," her father added, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. For a moment, Sophie considered telling them everything about Maxime, about the crushing weight of unrequited love, about how each day felt heavier than the last. But then her mother's phone buzzed with a work email, and her father glanced at the clock, remembering a conference call he needed to make, and the moment passed. "I'm fine," she said again, the words feeling hollow. "May I be excused? I have a history paper to finish." In her room, Sophie opened her journal and began to write. Pages and pages filled with words she could never say aloud, about how it felt to be invisible, about the ache that had taken residence in her chest, about her fear that this was what love would always be for her, painful and unreturned. The night of the prom arrived with rain that matched Sophie's mood. She sat by her window watching droplets race down the glass, while imagining Maxim and Elisa dancing beneath twinkling lights. Her phone buzzed with messages from Nadia, who had decided to skip prom in solidarity, inviting Sophie for a movie night instead. But Sophie couldn't bear company, not even from her loyal friend. The house was quiet. Her parents had gone to a colleague's retirement dinner, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Sophie scrolled through social media, torturing herself with freshly posted photos of her classmates in elegant dresses and suits. And there he was, Maxime in a black tuxedo, his arm around Elisa's waist, both glowing with happiness. Something broke inside Sophie then. The pain that had been building for weeks sharpened into something unbearable. She found herself in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. Pale face, red-rimmed eyes. A girl she barely recognized. The bottle of sleeping pills her mother occasionally used for international flights sat on the shelf, tempting in its promise of escape from pain. Sophie's hand trembled as she reached for it. She wasn't thinking clearly. She just wanted the ache to stop. But as her fingers touched the plastic container, her phone rang. It was her father. "Sophie, your mother forgot her speech notes. Could you check her desk and read them to me?" The mundane request snapped Sophie back to reality. She pulled her hand away from the pills, shaking. "Sophie? Are you there?" Her father's voice held a note of concern she rarely heard. "Yes," she managed, her voice cracking. "I'm here." Something in her tone must have alerted him because there was a pause before he asked, "Are you crying? What's wrong?" And suddenly the dam broke. Through sobs, Sophie told her father everything about Maxime, about 2 years of silent longing, about feeling invisible and unlovable, about the crushing despair that had taken over her life. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a terrible moment, Sophie thought he would dismiss her feelings, or worse, lecture her about being more rational. Instead, his voice came soft and urgent. "Stay right there. We're coming home. Don't do anything until we get there, okay? Promise me, Sophie." "I promise," she whispered, sinking to the bathroom floor. 20 minutes later, her parents rushed through the front door. They found her curled up on the sofa, emotionally exhausted but calmer. What followed was the most honest conversation they had ever had. Her mother, usually so composed, cried as Sophie described the depth of her despair. Her father, discovering the sleeping pills she had contemplated using, held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Why didn't you tell us?" her mother asked, her voice breaking. "I didn't think you'd understand," Sophie admitted. "You both always seem so logical about everything." Her father shook his head, regret etched on his face. "We've failed you if that's what you believe. Your mother and I, we've felt everything you're feeling. We thought by not drawing attention to teenage romance, we were protecting you." "I once loved a boy who barely knew I existed," her mother confessed, surprising Sophie. "The pain was so intense I thought I wouldn't survive it. My parents dismissed it as puppy love, and that only made me feel more alone." "We didn't want to minimize your feelings," her father added, "but in trying not to repeat our parents' mistakes, we made our own." That night marked a turning point. Sophie's parents arranged for her to see a therapist who specialized in adolescent mental health. They began to share stories from their own teenage years, the heartbreaks, the insecurities, the overwhelming emotions they had experienced. The perfect, always in control adults Sophie had known all her life revealed themselves as people who had once stood where she stood, feeling what she felt. Healing didn't come quickly or easily. There were still days when seeing Maxim in the school hallways made Sophie's heart twist painfully. But she was no longer carrying that pain alone. She had her parents who checked in with her regularly, creating space for her emotions without judgment. She had Nadia, whose unwavering friendship reminded her of her worth beyond romantic validation. And she had her therapist, who helped her understand that her value wasn't determined by whether a boy noticed her. By graduation, Sophie could look at Maxime without that crushing sensation in her chest. She had survived her first heartbreak, a wound that had nearly destroyed her, but ultimately made her stronger and brought her closer to parents who finally saw her completely. As they sat at her graduation ceremony, her mother squeezed her hand. "You know what I've learned from all this?" she whispered, "that sometimes the most important thing isn't having the right answer. It's asking the right questions and truly listening to the answers." Sophie nodded, understanding that the story of her unrequited love for Maxim wasn't just about teenage heartbreak. It was about visibility, about parents learning to see beyond the surface of their children's lives to the turbulent emotions beneath, and about a girl learning that being seen by the right people mattered far more than being noticed by the wrong ones.